Today's June 16th, 2021, and I'm here with Tyler Golato, who is the co-initiator of the VitaDAO or VitaDAO project. DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. Tyler, thanks for being here.
Awesome to be here, Brent. Thanks for having me.
So this is part one of part two on my BrentNally channel that you're watching right now. And part two is going to be on VitaDAO's YouTube channel. So make sure you check the link in the description below to continue watching the interview on VitaDAO's YouTube channel. So Tyler, you have a BS from Stockton University in biochemistry and molecular biology. You also were a fellow of oncology and cancer biology at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. And then you did a post-baccalaureate IRTA fellowship in molecular gerontology at the National Institutes of Health, or NIH for short. So is that a fair intro for you? Is there any other things you want to share about your background?
Yeah, perfect. I mean, I could talk a little bit about my sort of story and journey into biogerontology, if that's cool.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe you can tie, VitaDAO into that. You guys have the launch coming up here, June 18th to 23rd, which I'm personally excited about. I've been into cryptocurrency for many years. Obviously, I'm obsessed with solving the human aging problem. So it's really exciting that a project like this, that in my view passes the smell test and more, has come together. Yeah, if you want to share anything about your background that I just stated, and then maybe tie it into how VitaDAO came about, that would be fantastic.
Well, and feel free to interrupt me because this is actually quite a long story, and I have a tendency to ramble a bit. But yeah, I started my career wanting to be a physician. I was really I was interested in the sciences in general, but really thought that my calling or my mission was to be a doctor. And I grew up in the United States, and sort of early on in my journey through college, I come from sort of a working class or lower middle class sort of family, and part of a group in the United States that I think tends to fall through the cracks. So my family didn't have health insurance. My mom, for example, got quite sick when I was young, and I started to see a lot of what I consider to be systemic or institutional problems that exist within healthcare delivery, drug development, access to care in the United States. So I really started to become more interested during that time in research. I also saw, after some time in the clinic working in sort of oncology, that the limits of what you're able to do as a physician are really dictated by the standard of care that exists, particularly with very difficult cancers or things that are sort of poor prognoses. It's sort of, you're looking at certain statistical outcomes, and your ability to intervene as a physician really depends on the development of new treatments. So during the time when I was at Columbia University, I was really interested in this idea of discovering new cancer therapeutics. I was working on pancreatic cancer, glioblastoma, neuroendocrine tumors. And during that time, this was sort of the beginning of when cancer therapies were becoming increasingly personalized. It was a really big deal that we could sequence cancer genomes. We could identify the sort of driver mutations within individual cancer types. And this was really interesting because it yields a lot of new results and a lot of new potential therapeutics, but it also makes treatment approaches incredibly granular, which from my perspective meant that although we were making a lot of headway into being able to treat individual subcancers and very specific cancer types, it also slows down progress in a way from being able to do something like ameliorate all cancer. And while I was at Columbia, I became really interested in biogerontology. I obviously, for some time, had been reading, I read Aubrey's book. I was, following the work of, a number of biogerontologists, but, was initially quite captivated by, this idea of lifespan extension, but only later really began to process like, well, maybe this is actually an entirely different approach to medicine that would allow us to ameliorate age-related disease. Instead of treating a single cancer, maybe we could focus on DNA repair and bolstering endogenous DNA repair capacity. And maybe that could allow us to prevent age-related disease. So I was really captivated by this idea. I joined the National Institute on Aging and spent a couple of years there working on DNA damage and repair. But sort of realized up until that point, I thought maybe I was going to become an MD PhD. I was also quite frustrated with the process of funding in the sciences, the sort of rat race that a career in academia often entails. the fact that it's, really a publish or perish sort of environment, and the fact that if you speak to any, I don't know, even mid to late stage academic that's working on any topic, they will say that the majority of their time is really spent fundraising, and trying to get funding for the lab. So, I had an opportunity about 3 years ago. I met who's now my business partner at Molecule, which is actually the company that I have. I met someone who was quite deep in the decentralization space, in the Web3 space, and he was spending a lot of time thinking about the macroeconomics of the pharmaceutical industry and how some of the core problems that exist could be, let's say, I'm not sure if solved is the right word, but at least impacted by some of the concepts that were emerging in the sort of Web3 and the decentralization space. And some of these were around things like governance, for example, around the creation of new incentive systems, and also the creation of new funding models. So I began a journey about 3 years ago co-founded a company called Molecule, whose core focus is really to decentralize drug development. What that means at a very high level is we want to fundamentally change ownership dynamics and incentives in drug development. And our sort of core thesis is, what would the world look like if insulin was collectively owned by diabetics, for example? How could we actually change incentives in drug development by empowering the people whom drug development stands to benefit the most, really, patients and researchers, as opposed to pharmaceutical companies? And VitaDAO is essentially, in some ways, a first proof of concept that combines many of these principles that we've spent the past couple of years thinking about, that's ultimately focused on trying to build a large community, the types of communities that already exist in many cases, the types of communities that Lifespan has built, and Leaf, for example, and trying to bring those people together to collectively govern, fund, and develop longevity therapeutics.
Okay, I love it. That's really great stuff there. A couple of things that come to mind is, you talking about your work in cancer. That's such an obvious huge problem and has been for so many years. And we've thrown billions of dollars at it, hundreds of billions, probably even trillions of dollars into cancer research over many decades globally. So I just heard recently, and there was an article on lifespan.io just recently about a new cancer blood test that detects cancer incredibly early in multiple cancers. So it's called GRAIL, GRAIL is the name of the company. And the name of the test is called Galleri, GALLERI. So this is really exciting. And I want to look into this more and see how our company, Longevity Plan, can partner with them. A couple other things that I heard from your background is just kind of there with the creation of Molecule and how that has led you down a path of understanding how Web 3.0 is something that you mentioned there. If the audience isn't familiar with that, because I think I have more of a longevity focused audience, basically what I believe is that over the next 10 years or so, the whole internet is going to pretty much be redone in a decentralized matter. So that's pretty much what I think of when I hear Web 3.0. So things become more censorship resistant. That would be the reason to make it decentralized. And so with a decentralized autonomous organization, which is what VitaDAO or VitaDAO is, can you share with us a little bit about the benefits of it, why you guys are doing it this way? I know you kind of touched upon that already, but if you want to maybe get into the weeds a little bit, that would be fantastic.
Definitely. So decentralized autonomous organizations are a relatively new type of organization that have, in my opinion, a number of benefits, but also, a number of challenges that are still actively trying to be resolved in the context of this developing field. But what they do is that you basically create a central unit that governs this organization. In many cases, it's a governance token, for example, and that token is ultimately used to allow members who join this organization to have distributed power over the decisions that the organization makes, over the creation of proposals, and over basically how the organization functions. So unlike a traditional company where you might have a very specific hierarchy and a management team and executives or something like that, in the case of a decentralized autonomous organization, the power is distributed evenly amongst all of the individuals who hold tokens, and decisions are actually mediated by a smart contract. So they're essentially codified. If I, for example, in the context of a DAO, say that, I think that the DAO should create this organizational process, or I think that the DAO should release a certain amount of funds from its treasury to fund something, or to hire a developer, or to do anything, I can basically create a proposal That proposal is then voted on by the community. And if that vote passes, those funds are made automatically available to carry out that specific function. So what they're really interesting in terms of what they can achieve is essentially bringing together a large community around a common cause, giving everyone a voice in the context of that organization, and enabling a group of people to, and anyone really, to participate. In the context of VitaDAO, I mean, the main thinking here was, longevity research is something that has the potential to benefit all of humanity. If we're lucky enough to live a long life, all of us will age, right? I mean, you were talking about the amount of money that's been spent on cancer research. If you look at sort of the war on cancer, the amount of funding that's been dedicated, I dream of a world where that sort of funding is made available to fight aging. I think we would be much more successful in terms of avoiding all age-related disease if that was the case.
Tyler, real quick on that, to kind of piggyback on what you're saying there, if people aren't aware, what I've heard the experts estimate is that if we completely cure all cancers on the whole planet for humans, that would only add about 2 to 3 years of life expectancy to people. So I want people to really understand that. And as we've talked about, try to cure cancer. Now, cancer is awful and it's bad, but the point is that really what Tyler is, what he's saying there to really hammer it home is that if we solve the human aging problem and really cure all the aging related diseases, then we don't really know what the high end of the maximum life expectancy is. Like, we don't know. Maybe we can just live indefinitely as long as we don't, die from suicide, murder, asteroid attack or crazy things like that. We might be able to keep this biological meat machine alive and healthy indefinitely, potentially, theoretically. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if you cure all cancers, you might get an additional 2 years, and you really just end up selecting for cardiovascular disease. And if you cure cardiovascular disease, you end up selecting probably for diabetes. And if you cure that, you end up selecting for stroke. You know what I mean? Or so, I mean, it's this. I think a lot of times, what I always found funny is, if you ask people, do you want to cure cancer? Or do you want to cure Alzheimer's? Do you want to cure, cardiovascular disease? People will say yes, but when you speak about aging, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, that's quite a different question.
That's unnatural. Really, don't do it. It's unnatural. Yeah. Like all the other things aren't natural too.
Exactly. So, I mean, what the goal with VitaDAO is to take this new sort of organizational framework that is really in its infancy, but really quite interesting in terms of the things that it can motivate and develop, bring together a community of researchers, enthusiasts, really anyone who has a fundamental interest in longevity, and also combine that with people, a lot of people, let's say Web3 OGs, Ethereum OGs, people who maybe have done quite well in crypto over the past few years and now want to support a cause where they can really make a difference. Align those two communities and go out to find research projects, particularly with a focus on sort of preclinical stage drug development projects in the context of longevity and Healthspan extension. Fund those researchers, try to make funding decisions relatively quickly, and then in exchange for the funding that's provided by VitaDAO, actually own the intellectual property that results from those projects. And the idea would be, over time, if the organization is successful, eventually you'll have a community, hopefully a very large community of enthusiast researchers, people who really care about this cause and believe in it, governing a portfolio of intellectual property, working together with other organizations to co-develop it and bring these therapeutics to market, hopefully with the right incentives. And this is interesting for me, mainly because it's an experiment in a new way of doing things. At the moment, longevity drug development is, it's not even necessarily something that is accessible from an academic perspective. It mostly lives in this sort of VC startup territory. It's funded by, a relatively small number of organizations in the context of biomedical funding in general. And yet it's something where there's a tremendous amount of public interest and a tremendous amount of curiosity. So creating, an organization like this where you enable a lot of people to have a voice and a lot of people to have a vote in what should get funded, what is worth pursuing, at the most like reduced level. And I hope I'm not held to this as like a public comment on what VitaDAO is, but I mean, in my mind, it's
the internet never forgets.
Like, what if you gave what if you gave like our longevity, a budget to do things, right? You have this community, this sort of ability to up and down vote things. It's a self-organizing community. You have a bunch of people who are aligned, they're motivated by the same things. What if you gave them, a budget to do something, for example? And that's, in its simplest form, that's all we're doing. And crypto, or why use crypto for this, for example. It's just that these organizations are really created through this sort of through a technology framework, and that technology framework is mediated by smart contracts and a token. And those tokens can create really, really interesting incentives as well that actually coordinate people. People are motivated to do things for this organization because they have a sense of ownership in it. They have a voice and they have a sense of power. It's not a company that someone else owns. It's an organization that if I want to join and become a part of, all of a sudden, what I say matters, and my vote actually counts. And that's extremely empowering. And if there's anything that crypto has shown us is it's that it's actually quite good at bringing together communities and motivating a core group of people to form around something and try to carry out a specific task.
Yeah, I love it. And I like the way that VitaDAO is structured from what I've personally researched to this stage. And I always say, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. It's so important. And so much of our society is rapidly changing due to technology changing how everything works. And so our incentives are getting all screwed up on the planet. And I think it's a big reason why we have so much perceived problems on the planet and so many people are upset about certain things. It's because our institutions are hierarchical and they are not keeping up with the changes in technology and all the disruptions. So I see a need for new types of structures like decentralized autonomous organizations. And it totally makes sense to me. One real quick question that I have for you. You talked about how, I think you were using a hypothetical, you could bring up a project proposal for VitaDAO and then people could vote on it. Can you share a little bit more details about how that would work? I mean, I assume that you would have to have VitaDAO tokens to be able to bring up a proposal. Otherwise, any Joe Schmo could just bring up a proposal. So can you share a little bit more about details of that? How many tokens would you have to have? Are those rules written yet? Can they change? How does that stuff work?
All of the rules of a DAO are constantly in a state of flux, constantly being iterated on and constantly refined. What I can talk through is the current governance proposal, which will become codified after launch. Members will basically, the people who participate in launch will approve this governance framework. But at any time, anyone could make a proposal to change a certain element of that. And if it actually gains a certain amount of traction within the community, these things can change. In the current form, the way it works is, and again, this is very experimental because these things will basically learn by doing, but anyone who even has one Vita token could make a proposal to the DAO. There's a series of processes that have to be followed in terms of the way that proposal is ultimately put up for a token-based vote. But essentially, there's two core platforms that the DAO is currently using for communication. One is our Discord, which is sort of an informal stream of consciousness-like way that people communicate. We have sort of public channels in there that anyone, you don't even have to be a member of the DAO, for example, to join and just follow what's happening. And then there are private channels, which are basically consist of working groups. And those working groups cover a range of topics. These are things like the longevity working group, which is mostly for asset evaluation, due diligence, finding particularly interesting projects that people might want to fund, governance working group, a token economics working group, a legal working group, a technical working group. And basically those working groups, their primary purpose is to serve the members and provide guidance to the members. So for example, if somebody comes into the DAO and they want to make a proposal, the way they would do it in a stepwise process is they would basically create a draft, which would be considered a rough proposal. They would begin discussing this in the sort of Discord channel itself. If that idea has a bit of traction and there's other people that support it, and they could basically upload this to a platform called Discourse, which is the more slightly formal, less stream of consciousness, messy Discord channel. In Discourse itself, you can basically create, there's a VitaDAO proposal template that people can follow to submit a proposal. There's sort of an informal voting system where people can basically upvote or downvote this. And if it reaches a certain threshold with a certain amount of community support, it's then uploaded to the VitaDAO governance platform where people vote with their actual tokens. And basically the way you vote with your token is you stake it into a smart contract. Let's say I have 100 tokens. Maybe I really care about this proposal. I stake all of those. I want to vote yes. I stake 100 tokens, yes, into this smart contract. The proposal runs for a certain number of days, and when that period is finished, typically 7 days, the proposal either passes or it doesn't, and I receive my tokens back. During the period that you're actually voting on a proposal, your tokens are completely staked.
Let's switch over to the VitaDAO YouTube channel. So this was part 1 of part 2. Tyler's going to be answering more questions about VitaDAO, and we'll maybe talk about DAOs in general, where we think VitaDAO can go long term. So stick around for that. Check the link in the description below for the link to VitaDAO's YouTube channel, and specifically this video. And I want to let everybody know before I got my Ethereum shirt on, Ethereum is the cryptocurrency that you'll be using for the auction if you want to purchase the VitaDAO tokens June 18th to June 23rd for the Gnosis auction 2021, of course. So just here in a couple of days, we're recording right now on June 16th. So check the link in the description below to continue watching the interview.